Alright, Tracy R. Twyman back with you at the Plus Ultra Podcast. We're talking to author and international man of mystery, Peter Levenda. So you've heard about Levenda's involvement with the Slavonic Orthodox Church. Now here comes the part where he describes his involvement with the publication of a text known as the Necronomicon. Many of you are familiar with the references to this legendary grimoire in the short stories of American horror writer H.P. Lovecraft from the early 20th century. Lovecraft describes it as this long sought-after, super-secret, super-dangerous, magical text. It contains spells to call up primordial demons from a time before time, the Great Old Ones, as he called them. They once ruled the earth, but were overthrown by newer gods, somewhat like the Titans were overthrown by the Olympian gods. Yet they still lie, dead but dreaming, according to Lovecraft, underneath the surface of the earth, waiting to be brought back to life by the satanic rites of cultists who secretly worship them. And when they rise again, chaos will reign supreme. The Necronomicon was always thought to be nothing but a fictional element in Lovecraft's stories, and it became an integral part of some of the stories written by his colleagues as well. Many more copycat stories followed after Lovecraft's death. Today, experts on literature refer to these stories as part of what they call the Cthulhu Mythos, named after the main figure in the hierarchy of Lovecraft's Great Old Ones, Cthulhu. There are literally thousands of books, short stories, movies, rock bands, and role-playing games that make use of the Cthulhu Mythos, or refer to the Necronomicon. Part of this is because of the popularity of Lovecraft, which has grown exponentially since his death. But part of it is also because in the 1970s, a book was published claiming to be the actual Necronomicon. It was allegedly written by an Arab magician, writing in Greek, and reiterating magical spells that stemmed supposedly from ancient Sumeria. It tells how to use the magical power of the elder gods, the good gods of Sumeria, to protect the planet from the evils of the ancient ones, the bad gods, the equivalent to Lovecraft's Great Old Ones. When I first interviewed Peter Levenda in 1999 for Dagobert's Revenge magazine, I asked him mainly about his book that was out at the time, Unholy Alliance, about Nazi occultism. But during the week that I was preparing the interview questions, I happened to pop open my copy of the 1970s Necronomicon for some odd reason, and I noticed for the first time that Peter Levenda was mentioned in the acknowledgements. I thought this was an amazing coincidence, as I had owned the book since I was 12, but had only recently discovered the author Peter Levenda. So I asked Mr. Levenda about it in the interview, and he replied that he had been involved in some of the translations for the book. Many years later, I came across an article in the New York Press called The Doom That Came to Chelsea, written by Alan Cabal. In it, the author claimed to have been involved with the circle of occultists in New York that had been responsible for publishing the Necronomicon, and that the whole thing had been fabricated by the person who is credited as the editor in the Necronomicon, known by the alias Simon. Alan Cabal claimed that Simon was, in fact, Peter Levenda. I quote, "Into this bubbling swamp of spiritual fecundity stepped Peter Levenda, a.k.a. Simon. Charming, soft-spoken, and aloof, well-versed in all aspects of occult theory and practice, he eased his way into the center of the scene. The text itself was Levenda's creation, a synthesis of Sumerian and later Babylonian myths, and text peppered with names of entities from H.P. Lovecraft's notorious and enormously popular Cthulhu stories. Simon was also Levenda's creation. He cultivated an elusive, secretive persona, giving him a fantastic and blatantly implausible line of bullshit to cover the book's origins. He had no telephone. He always wore business suits, in stark contrast to the flamboyant, Renaissance fair, proto-goth costuming that dominated the scene. He never got high in public. In short, he knew the signifiers and emblems of authority, and played them to the hilt. He hinted broadly of dealings with intelligence agencies and secret societies operating at global levels of social influence. So when I set up this latest interview, I decided to ask Peter Levenda about these accusations. In fact, it turned out that a book had recently been published, written by this mysterious Simon, detailing the alleged genesis of the Necronomicon. So I read the book, which Peter Levenda kindly provided me a copy of, and then I asked him some pointed questions. Now, let's talk about the Necronomicon to the extent that you're willing to. Now, you saw the sort of pre-interview questions that I sent you. You can see what I'm thinking. After I read Dead Names, which is credited to the author Simon, who's also the person who is listed as the editor of the Necronomicon. Right. After I read that, I gotta say that there's a lot of similarities between Simon and you, and it's hard for me, unless you give me some other information, it really seems like you are Simon. Am I wrong?
Well, a lot of people make that assumption, and it's at this point, after so many years, it's that assumption's been made a lot. I mean, there have been other assumptions made as well. I mean, that Simon was Herman Slater or Larry Barnes or some combination of the two, or even other people that I recently received an email from somebody who said it was someone else that I knew years ago. It's a wrong, it's a false assumption. However, the similarities might be due to the fact that I occasionally edit other people's work, especially when their grammar and their English isn't that great. So there might be a stamp of my English language ability on it or something. But Simon's definitely a different person.
Okay.
And
but you were involved in editing this latest book, Dead Names.
Yeah, how shall I put it? In an informal sort of way. I just said, let me look at it, let me pull it into shape. Especially because a lot of it was about me, so.
Yeah, well.
I wanted to make sure that, nothing too outrageous was being said.
I mean, really, that's what part of it that made me think, really, that you were him, is that, a large portion of the book is about you and your life, your teenagehood that you've already described for us, and, it seemed like it was building up to something, and then it sort of switches all of a sudden to being about Simon, and, there's no... It ends up with you being, I guess, a translator for the Necronomicon, but it seemed to me like, since it was telling your own life details in such great detail, that it seemed like I was a bit surprised that you ended up being somewhat of a minor character in the end to the whole story.
Well, it was, the thing is that the story of the discovery of the book is really bound up with the church. And you can't really tell the story without telling the story of the church, which is in itself a pretty good story.
So
I believe the decision was made, we can't tell this story because people have to know how this happened.
Okay. So
if we just say it was discovered by a couple of monks from this church, well, that information has been out there all along.
In the church,
been out there.
Sorry to interrupt.
In the literature, it's been out there in the in various introductions or prefaces to various editions of the Necronomicon. I think it was mentioned in the Necronomicon spell book. So the ideas were out there, and we were always kind of astonished that nobody picked up on it and developed the leads that we gave. There were clues here and there, about what had happened and what had transpired, and no one really followed up. There was always this clamor of, is the book real or is it not? Who's Simon and everything. But the information was always out there. It's just that nobody bothered to look. So I think in Dead Names, the idea was let's put this to rest. Let's tell the story as it happened.
And the church you're referring to is the Slavonic Orthodox Church that you and
right.
Andrew started when you were teenagers. Okay, so if you wouldn't mind just giving us a short version of it, how did the Slavonic Orthodox Church somehow, how were they involved in the discovery and the publication of the Necronomicon?
Well, it goes back to back in the 1970s. The church had been started. We were involved with the AOCC, as I mentioned before, the American Orthodox Catholic Church. I pretty much was defecting from the whole thing. All the intelligence stuff that was going on, all the politics, all of the backstabbing sort of pissing me off. And Andrew was in a mode of self-glorification to the point where it was getting, the oxygen was very thin around him.